And so for me, the issue around gun violence in this country is also very much intertwined with the work we need to do around race and racism and this failed project of white supremacy that is killing a lot of hope for our future. Shalom friend, my name is April Baskin and I am super excited to welcome you back to another episode of Torah in Color. Okay, this week's Torah portion, Toldot, meaning the generations subtext of Isaac. This scenario plays out where, in part being the firstborn, Esau was given this birthright that is this sacred inheritance. He was very, very hungry and had a momentary moment of great physical need where he couldn't see past that need. Jacob basically tricked him into trading his legacy and his inheritance and his birthright for a bowl of soup. When I first read this passage, this immediately sounded quite similar to the experience of white America. I love bringing contemporary racial analysis to age-old conversations about our Torah and our text. And even if it doesn't always have a tidy answer or solution or put in a pretty bow, just making the connections here of, oh, this seems a lot like Esau. This reminded me a lot of white folks in America, and the soup and the stew is this crappy and faulty and ultimately harmful, very harmful, much more harmful than lentil stew, concept of, I'm cleaning the table while I talk, of white supremacy. And Jacob is playing the role of essentially the people with the power. So the ruling class or the owning class or corporations, those who are holding and hoarding that power. And as we see from the rates of poverty among working class and middle class white folks, and a number of the struggles they're having and a number of setbacks that our country faces that doesn't, in terms of healthcare and other social services and other challenges around incarceration, or not challenges, but systemic oppression and problems that we face as compared to other developed countries. A lot of it connects back to our issues around racism and more specifically our history with slavery. I see that a lot of white people have been tricked and duped into this conscious and often unconscious, but usually with subconsciousness anyway, conscious and unconscious superiority, not going to get us where we need to go, not going to get them where they need to go, and not going to get American society or this world where it needs to go. Our world is facing an array of complicated, adaptive challenges that are going to take solutions that need the voices of many different people at the table who are affected in various ways by all of these given issues, to develop collective solutions. And as long as our society remains segregated, we're not going to be able to do that work effectively. If at least one, and ideally some white folks hear this, I want to say to you that I want to encourage you to pursue racial justice for your own liberation. That all forms of oppression also hurt the oppressor in different ways and truncate our ability to be fully human and have access to the full range of human experience and possibility, and also to make decisions that make the most sense, because often it narrows our vision rather than being able to see everything and make informed decisions. So if we return back to Jacob and Esau, a couple other things that I just want to note that I think are interesting is that Esau is pretty maligned in the narrative, and many rabbis historically have critiqued and criticized him, and Jacob in many ways is lifted up. And I really loved in a piece that I read by Rabbi Aaron Pankin, may his memory be for a blessing, he made a really excellent point that actually when we look at the twin brothers, whether it was essentially tricking or stealing Esau's birthright in exchange for a bowl of soup. And then later in the story, in cahoots with his mother Rebecca, they also trick his father, their father Isaac, into giving Jacob a blessing rather than Esau. And so it actually seems more like Jacob is the person. So it's interesting because, as Rabbi Pankin said, one would think, based upon what's actually written, that Jacob would be the twin if we were going to take sides, which I also don't think you necessarily have to. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum approach. Same thing with the father's blessings or the birthright. I don't like that setup in general. We live in an abundant universe. I'm sure Isaac had plenty of room in his heart to hypothetically give blessings to both sons, but he doesn't. So I also just want to debunk or contradict that message, because that's the message in the story that plays into this age-old garbage, in my opinion, perspective of so much of this zero-sum thinking where there isn't enough to go around when there actually is a lot to go around much of the time, and people in power create lack and resource because they're hoarding it and leave the rest for others to fight amongst each other. So where does that leave us? I think for starters, it's important that we take time to learn more about what's going on. I'd recommend that you do take the time and begin to distinguish what in your world, where the oppression is operating. Because there's you and then there's the oppression. And those are two different things. And I think the final point that's interesting to me here is that Jacob eventually becomes Israel, for which the Jewish people are named. He's also the patriarch, or the trunk of the tree that becomes the 12 tribes of Israel, or the 12 tribes of Jacob. And in light of more analysis around the story and the fact that Jacob seems to be pretty shady, I don't really like that. What that brings up immediately for me is thinking about some of the work that I've had the privilege of being proximate to around some of the work that some really awesome Southern folks are doing who are descendants, former slave masters. There is a concentrated yet powerful group of leaders in the South who are doing work around racial justice and correcting the errors of their ancestors. It's critically important, whether it's in our own behavior or the behavior of people we revere. Later in the text, Jacob does take some corrective action. In my opinion, I don't think it was sufficient. He gave some resource back to his brother. It would have been better to me if he actually just gave him his birthright back, which he didn't do. So it didn't feel like a full or proper tikkun or healing, in my opinion. And yet I think it's important that we bring that lens to ourselves and to people we love and hold that really important distinction. There's people and people's inherent goodness, which I believe is the case the vast majority of the time. And then our behavior and actions that need correcting, that require accountability, that at times need to be condemned and are not acceptable. And it's really important to me that as we move forward, we have the courage to, as a beginning part of the process, be willing to hold a both and, hold that we can love someone or we can love a tradition, and in the text to notice, I'm not so down with what happened here, or actually this is really unacceptable. This is a tradition and people I'm part of, and I want to push back on this narrative because it reminds me a lot of oppression. And I think similar to what I talked about in the story of Noah, that I didn't actually talk about this, it was sort of in the subtext, that part of why it was important to me to critique and be in intensive dialogue with that text is because the Torah or the Bible is such an archetypal text that's used as examples, even to this day in our society, that it has both a subliminal and a conscious impact on decisions people make and the values they have. So I think it's valuable to be in really rigorous dialogue and say, this isn't okay. I think white folks got duped and they also got privileges, but relative to the amount of pain and suffering they're experiencing. Oh, that's what I forgot to mention. For me, the issue of gun violence in America is very much connected to slavery and white entitlement and white superiority and the ways that white people, particularly white men, have been conditioned for generation upon generation, for many generations, over 400 years, whether in their families or seeing models of elite men, that they had the right to hurt, have sex with, assault, and murder whomever they want, whenever they want, with impunity, with zero consequence, as Professor and Dr. Joy Leary-DeGruy talks about as it relates to sexual assault. And I think there's a parallel here with gun violence. You don't feed an appetite for violence and power as enforced through violence like that over many generations. You don't feed an appetite like that and have it just disappear because legislation changes or because it goes out of vogue socially. That is a profound sense of entitlement that's also intertwined with trauma that takes some serious work to examine and undo. Okay, I think that it's a wrap for this week. That is my Torah in color. I'm curious to know, what is your Torah in color? Much love.